Hello, everybody. Hi, everybody. So nice to have you here today. I'm really glad you were able to join us for this first ever town hall meeting that NCJW is sponsoring today. It's a big step for us, and we're glad that you're with us to take it. My name is Susan Hess, and I am the president of the Greater New Orleans section of NCJW. I'm really honored and pleased and excited to have the opportunity to do this town hall today because it's such a big first for NCJW. And I have been a member of NCJW for a very long time. I joined in 1965 when I was a new bride, and I've been an active member ever since then. My first ever project with NCJW was helping recently released ex-felons try to help themselves get back into society. So that was my introduction to NCJW, and it's been a very good one. I was looking for an organization that would do the things that I had been doing in high school, and I believe I found it. And I continue to find it every single day, and I hope all of you will too. We have, of course, had to cancel our Chicago convention this year, which was a shame, and everybody was so disappointed. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this first ever town hall meeting, so that everybody could sort of connect with each other, even though we didn't have the convention. But one of the absolute boons of having this new digital era is that people can join us from all over. And it doesn't have to be the people who came to the convention. It can be people from all over the country who might never have made it to the convention. So that's very special. A few little housekeeping items for this event. You are all muted, so please feel free to use your chat function at the bottom of the screen. And if you have questions, you use the Q&A button and you can put in your name. Please put in your name to identify yourself and then the question that you have. And our CEO, Sheila Katz, will be speaking for about 10 minutes. And then she and NCJW President Dana Gershon will answer your questions in the Q&A session, moderated by Vancy Boyar from NCJW Rochester. So I'm very, very thrilled to introduce our CEO, Sheila Katz. And I was very lucky that Sheila came to New Orleans during the year to meet us and to kind of interact with our section, which was terrific. But she went all over the place. She was a very busy lady. She went to lots and lots of different sections, and probably a lot of you have already met her. But I'll just tell you a few things that you probably don't know about Sheila, because not very many people do. Sheila served as a volunteer rape crisis counselor for 10 years, helping hundreds of young people go through serious traumas. She very closely relates to that situation. And in addition to that, Sheila, motivated by her mother's journey with multiple sclerosis, has always been a longtime disability inclusion advocate and has been in the forefront of trying to make Jewish institutions around the country be accessible to handicapped people. Before she came to NCJW, Sheila spent 12 years with Hillel International, and most recently as vice president for their student engagement and leadership section, where she spearheaded Mitzvot, very cute, Hillel's nonpartisan civic engagement campaign that helped close to 20,000 young people get registered either in person for the 2018 election or by mail. So lots of things about, there are many other things I could say about Sheila, but those are some interesting little tidbits that I thought you would like to know. This past year, Sheila was named one of the 50 most influential Jews in the United States by Forward newspaper. And since arriving at NCJW, Sheila has worked tirelessly to strengthen our organization and truly celebrate our work as a grassroots movement. It's been an amazing first year for you, Sheila, and your leadership. We can't wait to see what you're up to for the next year. Can you really top what you've already done? Tell us about it.
Thank you, Susan. That was so sweet. Thank you again for that beautiful introduction and for everything that you do at NCJW in New Orleans. It is an honor to be here with all of you this evening. After, as Susan said, after we made the difficult decision to cancel our convention in Chicago, I was worried we wouldn't have the opportunity to get together. Even though this isn't quite what we'd imagined, I'm glad to be able to speak with you directly today. And today I want to talk about the power we have to make change in the lives of women, children, and families through community service, advocacy, education, and sisterhood, and why you, NCJW advocates, are the right people to make that necessary change. When I joined the National Council of Jewish Women a little over a year ago, with its exceptional track record of strong Jewish women leaders, I was excited to continue this legacy. For more than 125 years, NCJW has been a champion for women, recognizing the need for a space to build connections, organize, and fight for a better future for all of us. And when we say women today, we recognize and appreciate that gender is expansive and language is often limiting. We strive to become an inclusive home for advocates of all gender identities and backgrounds. And we're here today thanks to our Jewish values, the bonds of our communities, our commitment to tikkun olam, repairing the world, and the pursuit of justice. So as Susan alluded to, over the past year, as your CEO, I've had the pleasure of meeting so many of you. Beginning in September and continuing until the pandemic put a stop to travel, I visited 30 of our nearly 60 NCJW sections. From Miami to San Francisco, Chicago North Shore to New Orleans, I met with advocates from large and small sections, those run entirely by volunteers, and those with a full staff. Despite some differences, I found so many things that made NCJW sections similar. Your commitment to community service, to advocacy, to education, and the bonds of sisterhood, I've found in almost every section I went to. And I heard loud and clear the need for more support from our headquarters to invest time and resources in helping to expand grassroots community service and advocacy efforts. This is why so early in the year, we created the Engagement and Leadership Department led by Lindsay Morris. Under her leadership, that team has done extraordinary work delivering on the promises made to the field. In partnership with the Section Advisory Council, with input from board members, executive directors, section presidents, state policy advocates, and others, we launched the Section Diagnostic Tool, the Outreach and Engagement Toolkit, and monthly leadership newsletters. The engagement and leadership team continues to be in constant conversation with so many of you to learn more about the changing needs of this moment and how we can help. With fewer staff this coming year, we know that things will be different and at times they may even be difficult. And we also know that everyone at NCJW's headquarters will be responsive to you because you are the heart of this organization. In my section travels, I found that every person I met had a different and extremely personal reason for getting involved with NCJW. For some, it was a desire to volunteer and give back. For others, it was in response to a personal trauma or life-changing event that inspired them to get connected to our issues. For nearly everyone, though, it was a desire to find a community of people to make change with. Whatever your reason for getting connected with NCJW, being a part of this organization means you join a legacy of women who don't stand idly by, but find creative and effective ways to improve the lives and protect the rights of the most vulnerable members of our communities. And we do this again through community service, education, advocacy, and sisterhood. So a few examples. Community service. Estelle Green from NCJW Bergen County, which is in New Jersey, the greatest state, decided to join NCJW back in the 60s to meet other women and because her mother was a lifetime member. Her career in fashion led her to volunteering with the section's thrift shop, where she currently serves as vice president. Their thrift shop, like so many others around the country, helps get high quality clothing in the hands of those who need it. Estelle regularly volunteers there and recently celebrated her 100th birthday with over 50 of her friends from NCJW's Bergen County section. Thank you, Estelle, for your decades of service and for bringing your passion for fashion to the council thrift shop. An education example. Cheryl Pullman of NCJW Dallas recognized that more needed to be done in drawing attention to what was and is still happening at the US-Mexico border. So she organized 2 trips to Tornillo, the Immigrant Children's Detention Center in West Texas, so that members could bear witness and report back on what they had seen. The trips brought attention to the challenges these children were facing and participants left equipped with the tools they needed to demand congressional action based on what they saw. Thanks to this educational experience, participants continue to take actions, share their stories, and draw attention to what is happening at our border to make sure they do our part to advocate on behalf of vulnerable immigrant children. An advocacy example. In Florida, excuse me for a second. In Florida, state policy advocate Linda Geller-Schwartz learned that one of the best ways to get connected and to help human trafficking victims was to make sure they had access to hotline numbers. She also learned that locations that were high risk for trafficking included adult entertainment venues and massage parlors, and that they didn't put up that information and they were resistant to doing so voluntarily. So she worked with all of the Florida sections, and there are many of them, to pass a national human trafficking hotline posting law, from template legislation to finding a lawmaker, to wrangling with both chambers of their legislature, to bill signage. NCJW Florida sections made this law a reality. Linda even designed the poster with information in 3 languages that is now required to be posted in all adult entertainment venues and massage parlors throughout the state, making it significantly more likely for trafficked victims to gain access to this life-saving information. And one of my favorite examples when we think about sisterhood is around Sherry Frank, who you might have seen this week on CBS This Morning, speaking on behalf of NCJW, talking about her relationship with Congressman John Lewis and their collective civil rights work combating anti-Semitism and anti-racism work. She is the president of the Atlanta section. When I had the privilege of visiting the Atlanta section and asked how people got engaged, I kept hearing a similar answer unique to Atlanta. At one of my larger meetings while I was there, I asked everyone to raise their hand if they were a part of that NCJW section because of Sherry. Almost every hand in the room went up. This is because Sherry, like so many NCJW section presidents, deeply understands that relationship building is key to engaging and sustaining leaders. Since her time as president, Sherry has been holding weekly meetings titled News of the Week with Sherry, where anyone is welcome to debrief the week and have a sense of community. Since the pandemic, she's moved these meetings to Zoom and continues to engage in the deep relationship work necessary to create a strong section. Like Sherry pivoting her meetings online, even during this unprecedented global health crisis, we have been able to pivot and find new ways to address the unique challenges and heightened disparities of this moment. NCJW Minnesota advocate Deb Savitt moved into action once COVID-19 hit. After understanding that public schools would be closed for quite some time, she pivoted resources from their Periods Happen project, which had previously gone towards public schools, to 40 sites, including shelters where women and youth and other mutual aid organizations were gathering. Since March, Deb and other NCJW Minnesota advocates have distributed 74,941 pads and tampons to people who need them. Periods don't stop in pandemics. This is one of the greatest ways to provide dignity to people who can't afford menstrual products. And since they're so close to 75,000, please know that I'm mailing a box with the remaining products needed to get you to the 75,000 number. And I'm sure this is only the beginning of what your total will be this year and how many people you'll be able to impact. Another community service example. Prior to COVID-19, over 1 million individuals in New York City were already food insecure. And as the economic effects of the disease continued to roll out, many New York City residents found themselves food insecure for the first time. Led by NCJW New York Executive Director Andrea Capel, they pivoted their food pantry program to allow contactless food transfer. The New York section also waived the program requirement for Manhattan residency and lifted the restriction of receiving food only once per month. Beginning in April 2020, which is only a few months, they have been providing food to 300 to 350 families every single week. It's amazing. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, Jackie Beckett from NCJW Colorado wanted to engage their advocates and make sure to create a space for learning, growth, and understanding. So she started their first ever online series of Listen and Learns on racial justice in America. Their first one was last month with Dr. Sharon Bailey, the manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion for Denver Public School System, and a local and national expert on this topic. She led the discussion, where do we go from here? So section members could learn and be able to help make a difference in racial justice. These conversations are just the first step, and I know so many of you are engaged in similar projects right now. COVID didn't just hit the United States, and our NCJW advocates in Israel didn't stop as coronavirus spread through the country. In response to 8 women being murdered by their partners since the beginning of the pandemic, Fida Nara, a fellow in NCJW's Connecting for Impact program, helped organize a socially distant protest with thousands of people calling on the Israeli government to fund programs and organizations battling domestic violence. The pandemic didn't stop Fida from showing up and calling out acts of violence and oppression. She did so in the legacy of these 8 women. In Israel, when someone dies of domestic violence, they alter the traditional Jewish response of, may their memory be a blessing, to, may their memory be a revolution. Fida helped make their memories a revolution. In the beginning of the pandemic, things shut down quickly, and there wasn't much time to prepare. Many of NCJW's most dedicated volunteers were all of a sudden considered vulnerable because of their age or health condition and couldn't run out to the store to get items they needed or volunteer to help others like they would normally do. Within days, sections started calling their members to check in, to say hi, and to see if there were small ways that we could be helpful. Within a few weeks, more than 30 sections got involved. And now, under the umbrella of Hello Neighbor, a NCJW program that originated in the 70s and was brought back to connect our outreach efforts, we have collectively reached out to 10,000 NCJW volunteers to check in. Elaine from Pennsylvania shared with us, I'm so impressed by the kindness and concern shown by NCJW. I'm a senior citizen, and while my daughter is taking great care of me, it meant the world that you reached out to make sure I was okay. I'm honored to be a part of this community. And these are just some of the myriad of examples coming in from each of you and your sections on the phenomenal work you're doing every day. We are more connected than ever. And as a movement, we've pivoted to expand digital content and convenings in this time of virtual gathering. From our abortion and Jewish values toolkit, to the new Rabbis for Repro campaign, to NCJ webinars for leadership and for the full movement, we are committed to strengthening these efforts as we continue to face these challenging times. We are a movement that prioritizes community service, advocacy, education, and sisterhood, and this is how we continue to thrive. Now, at a time of a global health crisis and with racial justice at top of mind, we know how important it is to build on the movement we've created. Our mission is to improve the lives of women, children, and families. Although NCJW has evolved over the years, and the whole world has changed even just in the past few months, the heart of this mission has never faltered. In this moment, we have never been stronger. We have consistently referred to ourselves as an organization representing 90,000 advocates across the country. But because of your continued engagement work locally, changes in our membership model nationally, and a wave of new supporters who deeply care about our work on reproductive freedom, I'm so excited to announce tonight for the first time that our movement now includes 180,000 individuals who are a part of the NCJW community. Well, it's actually 179,982. So we are really close to hitting that lucky number, and hope you all call a friend after this and get them connected to NCJW so we can successfully bridge that 18-person gap and get to 180,000. And we're not stopping there. In the next year, we're going to work together on the national and local level to grow that number to 400,000. How? Increased leadership development, increased branding and visibility on a national level, and the knowledge that our mission has never been more relevant. It is time we do more to talk about ourselves as the strong and powerful organization that we are. For too long, NCJW has done the work without taking credit. For too long, we have neglected to promote our own achievements. It is time to recommit to NCJW. It is time to publicly share the impact that each of you make every day. It is time to tell our friends, families, and networks why giving to NCJW sections makes such a profound and positive impact in the lives of vulnerable women, children, and families in our communities. People will not know how to get connected or why to get connected to NCJW unless we become our own powerful spokeswomen. I know we are up to the task. This organization is made up of volunteers and advocates from across the country and Israel, and we are stronger when we are working together. We are 58 sections strong, 180,000 people strong, and we will never stand idly by in the face of injustice. Our Jewish values motivate us to do this work. We fight for reproductive freedom because we believe in respect and dignity for all human beings, kavod habriot. We fight to appoint fair judges to our federal courts because our tradition demands we pursue justice for all, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. We fight to expand voting rights for all people and ensure every voice is valued in the United States and Israel because we know that all people are made in the divine image, B'Tselem Elohim. And we root all of our work in Talmud Torah, education and understanding based on our interpretation of Jewish law. NCJW was created because Jewish women were denied a seat at the table when we had something important to say. As Shirley Chisholm famously said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. We have built power for ourselves as an organization and as a people. We are fortunate enough to often be given a chair at the table. Sometimes we still have to bust out the folding chair, but more often than not, especially being a majority white organization, we now wield the power to create additional seats at the table to those who have historically not been invited when the most vital issues impacting their lives and bodies are being discussed and legislated. The disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women will lead to what some are dubbing a she session. And we know that it is having an even greater impact on women of color who are more likely to be essential workers and already suffer health inequities. Our role at NCJW is not only to recognize that, but to work harder as we seek to address economic disparities. NCJW advocates have already responded in so many creative ways, and I know that as our work continues together, we will have an even greater opportunity to create change. You can go far alone, but we can go further together. NCJW women who came before us, like our founder, Hannah G. Solomon, paved the way for all of us who continue this work today. We know it's a difficult time for many reasons right now, but we're going to need to get through it by celebrating together, mourning together, and created needing change together. As said by my personal favorite shiro, Oprah, nobody's journey is seamless or smooth. We all stumble, we all have setbacks. It's just life's way of saying, time to change course. Hannah G. dreamed of a movement like this one that wouldn't stop when the work got hard, and it is up to us to continue building on that dream. Together, we will continue to adapt to the new realities around us and write a better and brighter future. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheila. I think I can speak for everyone when I say it was wonderful to hear from you. My name is Nancy Boyer from the Greater Rochester section in New York, and along with Joyce Rosenfeld from the Dallas section, we recently served as co-chairs for the section advisory committee. I also consider myself an active NCJW advocate. My connection to NCJW began in the early 90s, first serving as our section's treasurer, then as a co-president, and now working with a wonderful group of young, active women in our Public Affairs Committee on voting issues. Just to give a quick summary of where we will go from here. I'm excited to introduce our new board president, Dana Gershon. So I think you see her on the screen with Sheila and I. Dana and Sheila will answer your questions together. I'll help to moderate the conversation. Most of the questions we're asking today were sent in by all of you beforehand. So we do ask that you, if you have a question, please enter it into the chat. And you're going to notice that there's panelists and everyone. So be sure that you be careful about how you want to do that. So we only have about 30 minutes, so we will try to get to as many questions as possible for today. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dana, our new president. Dana Gershon has been a social justice activist and leader in the Jewish community since high school, when she served as social action vice president of her NIFTY region. Dana has been a director on the national board for us on NCJW since 2017. Professionally, Dana is an attorney with a private practice that specializes in employment law. She has also taught legal research and writing at Boston University School of Law and Judaism and Justice in the Genesis program at Brandeis University. Dana and her husband, Rabbi Jonah Pesner, live in the DC region with their 4 daughters. Dana first got involved with NCJW because of her dear friend, Nancy Kaufman. Dana served on the board this past triennium, and a few weeks ago, just a short few weeks ago, formally started as NCJW's president. All right, so we're gonna dive in, but I think we're gonna ask Dana the first question just to get warmed up here. You took over as NCJW's board president just a few weeks ago, as I mentioned. What made you want this role?
Thank you, Vancy. First, before I get to the question, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I want to also, of course, acknowledge Sheila Katz, our CEO. We are so grateful for your leadership at this moment. And I want to thank everybody who is joining today for being here. Now, just jumping to your question, I'm going to back into it a little bit and talk about why I wanted to join the NCJW board 3 years ago in 2017. As you mentioned, I was connected initially to NCJW by Nancy Kaufman, our former CEO. We knew one another when I lived with my family in Boston, and were active in various social justice endeavors, largely in Israel, together from the Boston Jewish community. And Nancy first connected me here in DC to Jody Rapan, and then for a lovely breakfast. And then I found myself shortly thereafter talking with Linda Slucker, who was then chairing nominations and talking about joining the national board. And when Linda told me that the 3 top priorities of NCJW were reproductive health rights and justice, courts, and voting, I said it to myself, but I said it also out loud to her, well, I think I was really made to be part of this organization and this movement. My own history, I graduated from college. I knew I was going to go to law school, but I also knew that I wasn't quite ready to go yet. And so I spent a year working in a women's health clinic in New York City, which provided abortion services, and doing counseling work on reproductive health for mostly low-income women in New York City. It was a formative experience for me, and I actually stuck with it even when I was in law school, and continued to put in hours at the clinic, and sort of seeing what on the ground reproductive health rights and justice look like. And just for context, that was in the early 1990s, and while I was working at the clinic, the Supreme Court handed down the decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which really kind of revolutionized, how we thought about abortion rights in this country, and gave a whole new framework. But it was a very big moment for reproductive health rights and justice. We feared that they would be gone. Fortunately, they weren't gone. They were largely restricted, and we've been living with that since. But that's the context. And that was the time that I then shortly thereafter entered law school. And reproductive health rights and justice was a big piece of what I cared about, what I studied in law school, in terms of civil rights, in terms of really analyzing that decision and Casey on the ground and what it meant. As you know, as I led on there, I'm an attorney. I became an attorney then. I'm still an attorney now. And the focus on the courts, you know, I know firsthand how important the courts are, because that's my lived experience from the time that before I went to law school and into law school, and how much of an impact a court decision can have on real people's lives. And so from that moment with Linda Slucker, I knew that I wanted to be part of NCJW. So why being president? Well, sometimes leadership calls you. I was fortunate enough to serve on the search committee that led to the hiring of Sheila Katz. Sheila is an incredible leader, and I really wanted to be there to be part of what Sheila was going to continue to develop at NCJW, and to provide whatever support I can to Sheila in that role. It is daunting. As you said, I'm only maybe in my third week here, and it's a lot. I stand literally on the shoulders of giants in Beatrice Kahn, Debbie Hoffman, Linda Slucker, going on and on back, and I can't name everybody, but it is really quite something. I have very large shoes to fill, but I'm excited for the new triennium. Our work is certainly cut out for us. So I hope that gives enough answer to your question there. We can move on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dana. And I think for all those section presidents or past presidents out there, they have been in your shoes and are there to support you. Okay, so here's the first question from our group that was submitted. Sheila, as you know, I co-chaired the Section Advisory Council for many years, and I know this is something all of us think a lot about. So I wanted to ask right off the bat. You want NCJW to double in size. What are some of the best strategies you've seen for increasing member or advocate engagement?
Great. Thanks so much, Fancy. It's great to be in this conversation with you and with Dana, and thank you for your work with the Section Advisory Council. And if Joyce is on the phone, thank you to her as well. It's a great question, and I know we have a lot of people out in sections who can also answer this question, who are deeply doing the work. I know the St. Louis section recently led a training about engaging leaders for our leadership, but I'll add in a few things that I think are important tidbits I've learned along the way. And one, surprisingly maybe, that I'll share is actually what a lot of people have learned about engagement from mega churches. Because when you go in and you think about a mega church, if anyone's been there, if you can picture it, a lot of times people think it's because of the music, it's because of the dynamic pastor, it's because of the food that they have afterwards. You always have to have food. But actually, all of the data shows that it's none of those things as to why people are continuously engaged and how they're able to engage in mass quantity of numbers. It's actually because the second somebody even pays remote interest in getting connected to one of those churches, they're assigned, I'll call it like a buddy, somebody who's a social connector, who's responsible for a few families, a micro community, if you will. So if I want to get connected there, all of a sudden, before I'm even invited to go to church or to any of the activities in a formal way through them, somebody's going to invite me over their home for dinner, and they're going to ask me how I'm doing, and they're going to ask me about my life. And it feels relational, and you build a friend system. And then what do? They train those social connectors to say, just so you know, I'll be at church on Sunday if you want me to save you seats. And the reason this is so brilliant, it seems so simple, but it's so brilliant, is because all of the social data that's out there indicates that nobody actually does things based off of, you know, the ideal of who they want to become, or based off of a variety of things. They do things because their friends do things. Like if you have friends that smoke, you are more likely to smoke. If you have friends who vote, you are more likely to vote. And so how do you create strong communities? By building deep relationships where people are cared for. And so what I want to suggest is, before we go and invite everybody to the great programs, it is not a, if we build it, they will come. What people are seeking are deep and meaningful relationships. And I think that's why I use the word sisterhood, whether you want to call it community, whatever you want to call it. The best practices around increasing our numbers is increasing our relationships with people and making sure that from the first conversation we have, it's about the person we're talking to, not trying to convince them to do something with us, but saying, who are you? What do you need? What kind of things would make your life feel meaningful? And then connecting them to the appropriate things or the appropriate people. And so that's like a deep lesson I think we can learn from that. And the example I gave about Sherry Frank in Atlanta, I don't give lightly. It was hilarious and wonderful. I was like, did all of you get involved because of Sherry? And they were like, yep. So if Sherry can do that in Atlanta, everyone can do that in their sections. We just have to talk about our work. We have to make it relational, and we have to make sure to not lose sight that there are real people at the end of the day that we're engaging on their journey. And that's a real meaningful part of our work.
That is so terrific. So simple and yet so terrific at the same time. Okay. I know a lot of our sections and Jewish organizations are thinking about how to engage women of color specifically. And we had several questions submitted about this, including from Ina Davis in New Orleans. Sheila, can you address this?
Sure. Well, hi, Ina. Great question. Well, first, we need to do better. The end, if you take nothing away, that's it. There are 15% of Jews in this country are Jews of color. And this is one of those things, it's not something that's hidden. So if you look around a room and you're not seeing about 15% of people who are Jews of color, it means we're not doing our job. And I know from having visited many sections in the country and coming to a national conference that it's just not an area that we've excelled in yet. There are some sections really working hard in this space. And I think a lot of people in the last year have had a bit of an awakening about what it might mean that we're not creating as inclusive of an environment as we want to make sure that every single person who wants to be involved in our work is welcome. And I think one of the ways we do that is by unlearning a lot of things that we know. As we think about celebrating the right to vote this summer, a lot of people will say it's been 100 years since women have had the right to vote. But we actually have to shift our language a little and say it's been 100 years since white women have had the right to vote. And I think actually acknowledging some of those things and acknowledging how whiteness has played a role in some of the privileges that have happened in this country, acknowledging how systemic racism plays a role in every single issue that we focus on, that's actually really important. We can't be performative allies either. We can't hold up a sign and then when somebody comes in who's a Black Jew, start asking them questions about did they convert, are they intermarried, where are their backgrounds? So we have to, anyone who might do that has to stop asking questions like that to think about how we really create a welcoming environment. And we just can't be surprised that Black people are Jewish, because they are, and they make our community stronger and better. And so in many ways, as we think about some of these steps, I'd say individually, for folks who are curious, I would say your own curiosity needs to take a back burner to inclusion. And my concrete recommendations, because it's really a chicken and egg cycle, it's kind of like we can't really engage more people unless a lot of different things happen, and they all have to start happening at the same time for there to be some momentum. I would say to the sections to think about having speakers who aren't only white women, to think about the language you're using, to make sure it's not making assumptions about backgrounds, to recognize privilege for white people who are involved in this work. And I think slowly and surely, as we begin to do this every single day, because it's not something to check off a box, we begin to create a more welcoming environment for Jews of color, especially Black and brown women right now who might want to get involved in our organization. So those are some of the things, but I'd say the 15% stat is something for people to be aware of and to be thoughtful of as they're designing some of the work that they're doing, and to notice it, to notice if you're not actually engaging folks.
Good moment to reflect on that, right?
Yeah.
We have a lot to learn. I'd like to add along those lines, Dana, NCJW has an entirely white board. What systems will go in place to encourage more diversity in our board?
Yep. That is a great question, and I think it's, you know, very important that we turn the mirror and look at ourselves sometimes.
Mhm.
One of the things that Sheila talked about when she was talking about increasing our numbers is the power of relationships. I know that it was on the nominating committee's mind when they were forming the 2020-2023 board that we wanted to have Jews of color on the national board. The challenge is you can't just call a friend of a friend and say, hey, do you want to join this board of this organization that you've never been involved with and you don't probably know very much about. It doesn't feel good. And I think what we have sort of, what we are learning, and this is a process, we're not done learning, we're just at the very, very beginning of this. We need to develop our relationships with Jews of color. We need to make sure that our spaces, including the national board, are welcoming environments where Jews of color will feel comfortable and feel very comfortable, not just that they have a seat at the table, but really comfortable sitting in it and speaking up and being part of it. And that's internal work that we need to do in order to make our national board an inviting place for Jews of color to join and be part of us. And this is work, frankly, that needs to be done on the ground, in the field, in the sections, and everywhere else. You know, I can only at this point speak for the national board, but I can tell you that we've committed to doing anti-racism training, racial justice training for our board, in partnership with our staff, so that we can become the kind of community where Jews of color will want to join us and join us in leadership. And we are also forming a task force of the board to look at racial justice issues and how they influence our work. I mean, so much of the work that we do in reproductive health rights, courts, voting, et cetera, involve communities of color. And we have to be thinking about, you know, our issues through the lens of racial justice, but also in the lens of involving our own fellow Jewish sisters of color. We plan to report that back out because we want to be transparent about this, because we want to be held accountable for the work that we either do or don't do. And so please, you know, please do hold us accountable. We want that. We invite that. And we invite, you know, the sections and the boards and anybody of sections, anybody else who wants to get involved in this work. It's not easy work to do. It takes support. We have a wonderful staff in DC that have wonderful outreach, and we can be a resource for sections that want to engage in this work as well.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna thank you, Dana. I'm gonna repeat something you said. You're asking sections and our organization to hold you and the board accountable, and I think we should be examples of how we do that and engage in healthy dialogue around some difficult issues. So I hope people out there are listening to that, because that's healthy. We've gotten a few questions, including from Carol Benson of the Bergen County section, on NCJW's stance on the Black Lives Matter movement. Sheila, can you tell us what NCJW is doing nationally?
Yeah, first I just want to respond. There's such great chat. There's a chat that just comes to panelists and those that go to everyone. Feel free to send it to everyone because I'm seeing some really good comments. I just want to respond quickly to Michelle and to Andrea. Like, I responded to the question before about Jews of color. And of course, we want to make sure we're a welcoming organization to all people of color, regardless of their background. I think that just rang true as something I wanted to comment about, because I do see a lot of sections engaging Black women, but sometimes making the assumption that those Black women aren't Jewish, which sometimes they're not and sometimes they are. And so 100% we need to make sure we're committed to the inclusion for Jews of color, for Black Jews, and for people of color holistically. So much of our work, as we'll get to, intersects with systemic racism. And we have to make sure we're, those of us who are white are not actually leading the way, but we're following a bit. And we're making sure to lift up voices of color and people of color along the way. So in response to just what came in, I would say one of the ways we engage more people in that is making sure that our work that disproportionately are impacting women of color is centered around women of color. And I know I'm so proud that so many of our sections have such great partner organizations locally that they work with, and we do nationally as well. And so those are some of the things. So thank you so much to those of you who chatted in to point that out. Vancy, in response to the question you asked on behalf of Carol, which is such an important question around Black Lives Matter and the movement and where we stand, I'll say we believe that Black Lives Matter, full stop. And this belief is not tied to what any organization says or does, or what any protester or activist believe or don't believe around Israel or Zionism. And the best example I'll give towards this is in the midst of all the protesting that has happened, when I went out and about in DC, my favorite protest sign that I saw, well, there were a lot. So up there in the list of my favorite protest signs that I saw was somebody who held the sign that said, "Matter is the minimum, Black lives are worthy, Black lives are beloved, Black lives are needed." And I want to hold that as framing as we think about this, because I understand I'm making something very complex, very simple here. But we have to be able to say out loud that Black lives matter. And that really is the minimum. It's not asking for so much. It's asking us to say that we see the pain, that we see the trauma that's happening, that we see the systemic injustice, and that we're committed to doing something about it. And so I do want to say, for those of you who intertangle those words with other organizations and movements, if you can, to separate it out, because no matter what, we have to be able to say that out loud, and we have to be able to go all in to say no matter what. It's not conditional whether or not we're going to stand up for the lives and well-being of Black people in this country. We are going to do that no matter what, right? And so, and it is important to be thinking about differentiating, you know, platforms that might come out in the future and platforms that we've had. I am aware of the fact that there's anti-Zionist language in the Movement for Black Lives platform. For all we know, that could even grow or enhance or become an even more central part to that platform. And what I am hoping everybody hears from me is loud and clear that no matter what happens in that platform, which we will continue to engage and we hope does not become anti-Israel, but even if it remains, if it gets terribly worse, that we have to stay in this, and we have to stay in this for the people who are vulnerable, because that's what our mission tells us to do. And I do think the Black community in America needs us to do this right now, and some of this feels like a distraction, and some of this is just complicated for us to continue to figure out what it means for us as we're engaging. For those of us who are white, we are called to this table as allies, and we have to unequivocally say that Black lives matter. For those of us on this call that are Black or Jews of color, it's so complicated to have to listen to white people talk about how complicated this is, and I'm sorry. And we're gonna do everything we can as a movement to stay fully in this. And as these complexities come up, and as the challenges come up, and if things should get, you know, terribly, terribly worse as we're thinking about engaging, if it should get anti-Semitic, whatever it might be, we will figure out a way to say loud and clear that we are in this with people of color in this country for the long run, as we also address these things, but we will not turn away at any point in time if the going gets tough. And so that's my way of taking something overly complicated and trying to simplify it, but I know there might be people who have questions or comments or disagree, and I'm really happy to engage more on this, but that's the high level from where I'm sitting right now. Dana, Vancy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
The only thing,
yeah, Dana.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add, and it's just really a theme that I think is coming through, is that this is about relationships. And we are fortunate to have partners in the work, in the civil rights and racial justice work that we do. And if we want to, at appropriate moments, be able to dialogue about why any language in any document or whatever is bothersome or loathsome even to us, or hurtful, or whatever it is, we have to have relationships. And you can only have relationships if you build trust. And so we need to deepen and build our relationships. And again, it's my lived experience. I have seen this. But when you're in deep relationship with people, and you do for them, they don't want to hurt you, and they may be hurting you in ways they don't realize, but we have to build those relationships so that we can have these challenging conversations when they need to be had. And we need to stay in this work and deepen our work in this area to really do that effectively.
Yeah, and I'll just also say, as you're saying that, I think, you know, I can't name all the examples locally of all of your partners, although that would be something to strive for. But when I think about our work nationally, just as an example, in our reproductive health rights and justice platform, we're in deep partnerships with Sister Reach and Sister Song. Sister Reach invented the term reproductive justice. They have framed our reproductive work around what it means that this disproportionately impacts Black women. They have helped us to see that the Hyde Amendment, which is currently being debated around appropriations, actually perpetuates racism because it basically makes it so that Black women in particular don't have access for insurance to cover abortions. Like, we need to recognize still in our quest for diversity as an organization that we're still a predominantly white organization, and we need to have deep partnerships and follow the lead of our partners on a lot of our issues. So I would just say, as you're thinking about engaging on work in response to systemic racism, you don't have to take up a whole new platform or take up it as a new issue. I would challenge everybody to say, what are your top 2 or 3 issues that you focus on as a section? And how do you focus on the layer of systemic racism that plays throughout it? Because you better believe that systemic racism is a part of every single issue we focus on, whether you're focusing on sex trafficking, you're focusing on voting, you're focused on economic justice. And so it's very important that we engage in that conversation. And to the person in the chat who said, when I say Black Lives Matter, am I talking about an organization? I'm not, when I say that I'm really saying that as a statement of what, you know, this came up in a grassroots way and was created by a Black Jewish woman, Alicia Garza, who after Trayvon Martin was killed, tweeted that Black Lives Matter, and that's kind of how it spiraled from there. And I think this quest that Black people in this country are asking white people to be able to say this is so important that we hold on to that as a phrase and not get bogged down in where it lives or what organization it lives with, but to be able to respond to the individual requests that have been made from us as white people, those of us who are white, and those of us just existing in this country, to be able to put ourselves in those shoes. If our children or your children were being murdered, if all of the policies were disproportionately impacting you, I mean, look at COVID right now. It is disproportionately killing Black people in this country. These things aren't random, and we have to start making sure our language acknowledges that it's not random and acknowledges that we're going to stand up for this. So I'm so appreciative of the comments that we're seeing in here. And gosh, we've got a long way to go. I do too, as far as my own education and learning, to be able to really, you know, fully show up as anti-racist. And again, I would just say this is going to be long and complicated work. We're in it together. We're committed to coming up with trainings for our leaders in the field. And as Dana said before, you know, we're committed to being public about what kinds of things we're doing so that we as an organization can also be held accountable.
So we are, I think was a good time to say we are working in uncomfortable work and at the intersectionality of very complicated issues in our country right now. And so the next question probably will demonstrate that, right? Because we are talking about Black Lives Matters, but there has certainly been a rise in anti-Semitism both before and even during the pandemic. Several people have asked, how is NCJW standing up to anti-Semitism in this country?
Dana, do you want me to start and you chime in, or do you want to start?
Why don't you go ahead, Sheila, and I'll jump in.
I'm so glad you're asking about it, because it's so important. And I guess first and foremost, I want to say that I've noticed a pattern that sometimes happens that I think is changing as anti-Semitism is on the rise. Sometimes I think if the rise of anti-Semitism was happening to any other group in this country, that NCJW would be way more involved in it, because we're so used to advocating from a place of our Jewish values for the most vulnerable, that sometimes we forget that we too are a vulnerable group, and we need to stand up for ourselves the way we would anybody else. And so I think it's very important for us to name that, to own that, and to make sure that when we see anti-Semitism, when it exists, whether it's in progressive spaces, whether it's on the left or the right, wherever it is, we have to call it out. First and foremost, 100%. And I'm so proud that this past year, as some of these issues came up, that we formed a board task force led by Susan Spires to really help us think about what NCJW's position on this is going to be. And when I say that, like, clearly we're against anti-Semitism, you know, but what does it mean to us? What is our definition of anti-Semitism? What are the things we'd like to see people advocate for, whether it be legislatively or programmatically? So those are some of the things that we're thinking of right now, but I would just say it's very important for us to speak out when these things happen. If we don't, nobody will. And I also think it's great learning lessons too in the relationships we're in. If we notice that people aren't speaking up around anti-Semitism that they see, but they are speaking up about any other kinds of isms that are out in the world, we have to have conversations with our partners and say, I noticed that you didn't say anything here. What's going on for you? Can I help you with the language, and can I help you move through this? And so I think that's really important as we navigate that we're in this together, and linking to all our issues have a layer of systemic racism. You know, white supremacy is something that impacts both racism and anti-Semitism, and we have to be making sure we're working in partnership to combat white supremacy in this country. I might have taken some of the things you were going to say, Dana, but I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, the only thing I would add is that, you know, anti-Semitism often happens at a very local level. I mean, I know we saw it in the last year in my kids' school. We saw it in a number of schools, and I'm sure that my story is no different than many, many people on this call around the country, whether it's on a sign or a desktop or a slur or an epithet or wherever it is. But because of the local nature of it, I know that one of the things that the task force that Sheila referenced, one of the things that they're talking about and they're trying to do is to try to provide support. Ultimately, the goal would be to have something like a toolkit to provide to sections that would say something like, when anti-Semitism happens in your community, what do you do? And how do you deal with it? And there are wonderful organizations that are out there where anti-Semitism and fighting anti-Semitism is their primary issue and their bread and butter, and they're partner organizations of ours. So we can learn from our other organizations and bring together sort of best practices, and then try to push that out to the sections and to everybody in the field, because this can be a very local thing. We don't always know what happens in somebody else's community at a national level, but so we need to put the tools in the hands of the people who are going to need to confront it. And I'm really grateful for the work of that task force, because we've really been dealing, we've noticed it for, you know, quite a while, that we need to strengthen our work in that area and be more ready to go, because sadly, anti-Semitism is truly on the rise.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work. I want to thank everyone again, but we're running out of time. And obviously our group has a lot of questions, and they are smart women out there. And if there's any men, I apologize, but for asking amazing questions and for sticking around to the end. We're so proud of all the work that you've been doing and all of that. So Sheila, I think you want to.
Yeah, I wish we had more time. We'll find more time. There were some great questions we didn't get to, but thank you so much to everyone who joined tonight. Thank you, Vancy. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Susan. And really, thank you to everybody every day who wakes up and figures out how they're going to make the world better with NCJW. We're so proud to be in this with you. Please stay safe and healthy during these crazy times we live in, and take care. And hopefully by next year, we'll be able to see each other in person. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good evening. Stay healthy.
Yep. Thank you.